Okay, guys, so we're returning. We're right here at the end of chapter 7, where his dad was hit by the Cowboys. So I'm just going to rewind just a little bit on the middle of page 96. "Father!" I shouted. The Cowboys turned to look at me. "Please," I shouted. "Please don't hit him anymore." The men turned away from me, and the man who had hit Father got off his horse and stood there beside it. Staring down at the ground, I knew he was looking at Father. He was still holding the pistol in his hand. "Please don't shoot him," I shouted. "Please!" This time they didn't even turn around to look at me. The man on foot, waving the pistol around, he seemed to be talking, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. I stood in the middle of the field trying to think. Maybe I could run across the fields to find a farmhouse where they might be, to get some people to come and save Father. But if the Cowboys saw me running, they could easily catch me in the open fields and ride me down if they wanted. I didn't know if I was brave enough to take a chance. The Cowboys were still looking down at Father. I turned and began to run across the field. Behind me, I heard somebody shout, and then I heard horses galloping. I swirled around to look. The Cowboys were galloping off down the road in the direction they had come from, leaving the cattle and the wagon standing in the middle of the field. I stared, and then a different group of riders came charging up the road from the other direction. There were a dozen of them, and they were driving hard. As they came up to the cattle still milling about on the road, they reined up sharply. Then most of them threaded their way through the cattle and dashed on, leaving two behind. I saw Father stand up, and I began running back across the road to the field. The new horsemen had dismounted, and by the time I reached Father, they were helping him to the side of the road. I ran up. "Don't worry, Tim," he said. "I'm all right." He had a bad cut on his head, which was still bleeding, and another small one over his eye. His eye was swollen, and it was going to be black and blue by the next day. He sat down on the ground while one of the men washed the cut on Father's head with water from a leather canteen and bandaged it with Father's own handkerchief. Who were those people? Who were those people? Father asked. Cowboys? Cattle thieves is a better name. We had reports they were riding this morning, and we'd been looking for them all day. You're a loyalist, I take it. I'm interested in making a living, not fighting a war. My boy and I are just trying to get this beef to Fairplains Point the way I do every year. Fairplains Point? The man grinned. It'll go to New York then. We'll see that it gets there. There are still a lot of people loyal to His Majesty in these parts. So if the guy grins when he says Fairplains Point, what do you think he is? A loyalist or a patriot?
Loyalist.
Do you guys agree?
Yeah.
What do you think, Boone? Is he a loyalist or a patriot? Loyalist. What evidence from the text gives you that inference that you're making? What do you think? Hang on. Hang just a minute. Why do you think that, Boone? You're not sure? Okay, you want to call in Jillian? Okay, tell me.
He said loyal to His Majesty, which means he, that means he, is loyal to him because he's calling him His Majesty.
Right, he's speaking highly, right? And he says here, Fairplains Point with the question mark, and he grinned. The man grinned. It'll go to New York then. We'll see that it gets there. He's like supporting that goal. We'll see that it gets there. We're going to support this. There are still a lot of people loyal to His Majesty in these parts. So he's speaking highly of His Majesty. He's not, you know how many derogatory terms there are for the Majesty? You know how many bad words there are for it? Right? And he's not using any of the bad words. He's saying a good word for His Majesty. He's, and even in capital letters here, the way it's used, right? Veriplanks point them, we'll see that it gets there. And Mr. Meeker, he's not interested in either side of the war. He's just trying to make a living, right? Okay. So they did. They waited until the others gave up on the chase and came back. And then they rode with us to New York, the New York line. We waited there again until they got us another escort. Do you remember what escort means?
I know.
Reagan, go ahead.
It's like a person who comes with you
Right.
to make sure you get there.
To make sure
to
you
and
get
from
there. To and from,
safely.
right. To take us farther along the way, and we crossed over into New York, the first time I'd ever been in the colonies besides Connecticut. It disappointed me. It didn't look any different, and I didn't feel any different either. And here I was in a foreign country, and it was just like being home.